What's up, everybody? My name is Blake Holmes, and welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a bit since a video has been uploaded for y'all, but trust me, it's because I've been working on something incredibly special for y'all. For those of you that may not be familiar with me when I was a student at Radford University, I ran a weekly radio show called Hot Takes with Holmes with a friend named Isaiah Adair, a general sports topic show where we gave our insights on the sports world. Well, I'm proud to announce that this is the official reboot of the show, and today I am joined by my good friend and co-broadcaster, Jacob Underwood, as this is Hot Takes with Holmes. Underwood, how have things been on your end lately?
Pretty good. Trying to stay safe throughout this pandemic. I know we're all missing sports, but yeah, just trying to get through it.
Absolutely, it's great to hear. We're about to jump right in, but first, I do want to go ahead and take this opportunity to express that we here at Hot Takes with Holmes are hoping that you guys are practicing social distancing and staying safe during the COVID-19 pandemic, as Jacob was just mentioning. Society and sports are kind of in a position that, frankly, we've never seen in this generation. So please stay safe and smart out there as we continue to eventually defeat this virus. Secondly, if you like what you hear today, be sure to hit that subscribe button down low and like the video. Any and all support that you guys give is greatly appreciated. We're excited to get back into the swing of things. So with that being said, we're going to jump right in, as the topic of this week's show is draft grades for each team in the NFL draft. So some of you may be thinking, what do you mean by draft grades? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go through each team alphabetically in the NFL. We weren't going by specific draft order or anything like that, and just see what we thought about their draft. Talk about the strengths of it, the weaknesses, what each role could potentially be filled. We're going to go ahead and jump right in, starting with the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals started off their draft this year drafting Isaiah Simmons with the 8th pick in the first round, a linebacker out of Clemson. Underwood, what are your thoughts on their draft, and what kind of grade do you give them?
I think that the pick of Isaiah Simmons is a great one, just simply because he can do so many things for your defense. People who are not familiar, he did a lot of different things at Clemson. He did spend time as a linebacker. You can put him back at safety. Also played a lot of slot corner, so he fits a lot of different defensive schemes. Whether you want to run your big nickel, your base defense, if you want to slide him into that will linebacker spot, or even let him be more of a center field type safety. He has the speed and athleticism to get his hands on footballs, get interceptions, and get turnovers. The offense is on the right path. Obviously, with Kyler Murray, they did pick up DeAndre Hopkins, still have Larry Fitz and Christian Kirk, also Andy Isabella. So they do have a lot of options on offense. And I believe in 2 to 3 years, the Cardinals team may be one of the top teams in the NFC. I'm going to give them a B for their draft.
I like what you mentioned there with DeAndre Hopkins, because in a sense, if you want to talk about it this way, DeAndre Hopkins was basically their second round pick. They traded their second round pick to Houston, trying to get DeAndre Hopkins along with David Johnson. But in that case, there wasn't a ton that the Arizona Cardinals could do. I am surprised, but not surprised at the same time they took Isaiah Simmons with the 8th pick, because I think their original thought process was they would have maybe went with an offensive tackle, one of the many different great offensive tackles going early in the first round. But when a guy like Isaiah Simmons falls down to the 8th pick, you have to take him at that point. I was kind of surprised the Carolina Panthers did not, but same thing. They got a great defensive player in Derek Brown at the 7th pick. So based on what they had available, I think that a guy like Isaiah Simmons doesn't just fall into your hands every single draft. So with them, I will give them a B+, just because of how much they were given and the situation they had. I think they did really, really well with their picks. This isn't really a team to me that was looking to be a contender next year by all means. Kyler Murray showed a lot of promise in his rookie year. They're looking to get there within a few years, but considering what they were able to grab in this draft class, they get a B+ from me. Not quite out of the park, but pretty solid in their own right. Up next, we have Jacob Underwood's favorite team, the Atlanta Falcons. They do have in the first round, they picked A.J. Terrell, a cornerback out of Clemson. A lot of Clemson players taken in this draft, along with LSU. Marlon Davidson was their second-round pick out of Auburn, a defensive end, and Matt Hennessy, their third-round pick, a center out of Temple. We'll hear from the guru, Jacob Underwood. What are your thoughts in their draft?
Yeah, favorite team in quotations with an asterisk and an exclamation point and then a negative sign.
Basically the same level as the Houston Astros.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the Atlanta Falcons have a ton of talent on offense. It's no secret. They do have Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, all types of stud offensive linemen, even picking up Todd Gurley in the offseason to be that RB1. So their offense really has never been the problem. A lot of it's fallen back onto their defense. Grady Jarrett is probably their star player on defense. Picking up Terrell was a decent move. I personally feel like there were better cornerbacks on the board at that time. I mean, they did, I guess you could call it a reach. They did need a cornerback, as they really only had one other one on their roster, and that was Isaiah Oliver, who they got last year, excuse me, 2 years ago, the same year the Panthers drafted Dante Jackson. So it's been sort of a feud between that. It was a little bit of a reach. I see why they did it. I don't really think that other than Terrell, any of their other draft picks can come in and make an immediate impact. Marlon Davidson's going to spend time behind Grady Jarrett, maybe learn from a premier defensive tackle in the league. So just simply because I don't think that Terrell was the best player available at that position, I'm going to go ahead and give them a C plus.
To me, when you're talking about this draft class right here, Marlon Davidson is a name. Even though I think he's a solid defensive end in his own right and he will be fine in the NFL, I have some questions on whether or not it was truly completely him or the impact of having a guy like Derek Brown on the same defensive line there in Auburn. It's an interesting situation right there. They do take him in the second round, though, so it's not too much. It's not like they picked him in the first round. The fact that they didn't, I don't see them getting much better with this draft class like I see a lot of teams doing. So with that, they're going to get a C flat. Maybe they can improve. They can prove to me that they deserve to be a little bit more. Terrell is going to have to come out and really show us why he's drafted before some of the other corners that were taken for me to raise that grade. But for now, they get a C on my draft class. Up next, the Baltimore Ravens, my favorite team in quotation marks and asterisks and all of that stuff. I will admit they had a spectacular draft. But before I give my draft class grade, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over to you. Just tell the audience what you think about the Ravens draft class, the number one seed in the AFC, who, reminder, got beat in the playoffs by the Tennessee Titans. They're looking to try to get farther this year. What are your thoughts in their draft class?
Yeah, like you mentioned, they really nailed it. They did a great job. The only slight problem I may have is their linebacking core is a little bit young with Patrick Queen and Malik Harrison. Patrick Queen's an outstanding linebacker out of LSU. He's not really a major athlete. He's just a smart player. He makes tackles. I don't want to call anybody Luke Kuechly, but Luke Kuechly never really had the extreme athletic skills. He was just smart. He knew where to be, had good instincts, and I kind of think Patrick Queen's sort of like that. I'm going to go ahead and give them a B plus simply because their linebacking core is a little weak right now. And if Patrick Queen has to show me that he is going to be one of those elite linebackers worthy of that first round pick.
To me, when you're talking about this team, what is the identity of this team? They have a great running game. That's the entire point of their offense. They throw the ball decently well. Lamar Jackson showed us last year that he is capable of winning games with his arms, which is a major criticism that a lot of people put on him coming into the league. When you look at this, you're telling me a guy like J.K. Dobbins, who a lot of people said is the best running back in this class, to fall at 55? Are you kidding me? And they get him in the second round. This team who runs the ball already so much of in a lethal way. My goodness, what a draft this was. I think there was a lot of holes, not many holes. I think that's kind of why they were able to have the draft that they did, because when you look at a team like Baltimore, finished on top of the AFC, they did, like I said, get exposed. Their run defense wasn't necessarily that great, but they get Calais Campbell in the offseason. This team didn't have many holes. And because of that, they had the ability to go after the best overall talent available at any time. That's essentially what they did. Patrick Queen, J.K. Dobbins, as you said, Justin Madubuike, they get him on the defensive line. That's spectacular. I thought Malik Harrison in the third round was a great pick for them as well in the linebacking core. I like this draft as much as I hate to say it, as terrified as I am to see the Steelers play this team this year. I'm going to give this draft an A, just because, again, this team, it's hard to imagine that this team in the regular season was going to get much better. And yet I think they managed to do just that in this draft class, picking where they were. So they get an A on my end. Up next, the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo, the AFC East is going to be interesting this year. Tom Brady, of course, leaves the AFC East, going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the offseason. It's really almost anybody's game in the East, but a lot of people are pegging the Bills as an early favorite. Josh Allen coming in, trying to prove that he's the best quarterback in the AFC East, although Sam Darnold and now Tua Tagovailoa might have something to say about that. So, starting off, Jacob Underwood, the Bills draft grade.
Yeah, this is probably the most optimistic Bills fans have been in a while. Tom Brady's finally out of the division. You don't have to play against him twice every year. You still have to go against Bill Belichick, obviously, arguably the greatest coach of all time. However, they do have all of the weapons. When you think about it, they get a playmaker in Stephon Diggs coming over from Minnesota. There's a reliable target for Josh Allen to throw the ball to. They still have Cole Beasley, as we all know. He's a first down machine. Put him in the slot. He'll get you 7 yards when you need 6. John Brown, the speedster out of Baltimore. They have a pretty good run game, a decent offensive line. They did pick up Epineza. And when you really think about it, they really didn't have many holes on defense. They maybe could have got a running back to go along with the attack on offense, maybe. But picking where they did, you're able to get maybe a good backup quarterback. Jake Fromm's probably a lifelong backup, if we're being completely honest. He may strive and become a starter one year, but I think he's probably a backup for his whole career. But they get more defensive ends, more third down specialists. So Buffalo's scary, and just for the simple fact they really another one of those teams like you mentioned that I don't think could have gotten a whole lot better with this draft. I'm going to go ahead and give them a B as well, just because they got depth where they needed.
This team right here, I'm going to go ahead and spoil it before we talk about any of the other teams in the AFC East. They are going to be my favorites to win the AFC East this year. And it's for a number of reasons. One, I do like the fact that they did add Stephon Diggs in the offseason, adding even more versatility to the receiving game. And they really lacked a true number one receiver. They get that in Stephon Diggs this year. To me, the Jake Fromm pick, considering he fell as far as he did, a lot of people were saying he could sneak into the third and fourth, into the third round. He falls all the way to the 5th round. They get him there. I think that's a solid pickup for them just because it's always good. As we saw with the Pittsburgh Steelers last year, Big comes in for one game, gets hurt in the second game. He's out for the season. Now we're watching Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges throw the football left and right. And it's just not it's not a good situation for Pittsburgh. And it really limited them on what they were able to do in the offensive end. Jake Fromm is a very similar quarterback to Josh Allen in a sense, maybe just obviously it's a weaker arm, but you can run a very similar play style when Jake Fromm is in the game compared to Josh Allen. So I like that pickup from them in the 5th round. Zach Moss, I think, was a good pickup in the 3rd round, although I would have preferred to see them go in the 2nd round with a running back, maybe a J.K. Dobbins, who was there, the pick before Baltimore. But I think that considering the holes they had, there weren't a ton, and this team is a threat legitimately to probably win 11 to 12 games next year, as long as we can play every game due to this COVID-19 pandemic. So to me, based on the fact that I would have liked to see them go in a different direction with their first pick, but they still managed to get Epineza, a decent defensive end, I'm giving them a B- for their troubles in the 2020 draft. Up next, we've got the Carolina Panthers, really Jacob Underwood's favorite team. As we go through, they do pick Derek Brown in the 1st round, a defensive tackle out of Auburn, as we mentioned a little bit earlier. I think Derek Brown was a very, very good pick. I was kind of surprised, like I said, they didn't get Isaiah Simmons, but Derek Brown's a very good second option as well. Jacob Underwood, your hometown team, the draft grade.
Yeah, so definitely when you think about it, we were talking during the draft, and I also was torn between Derek Brown and Isaiah Simmons, simply because Isaiah Simmons he's a unicorn. He's like Kevin Durant in the NBA. He can do everything. He can play every position. And then I started thinking more about what plagued Carolina last year. Yes, they had lackluster quarterback play, but they were still in games. That's what people don't understand. They weren't getting blown out. What really failed them at times was their run defense. They gave up over 5 yards per carry, had the worst rush defense since the 0-16 Detroit Lions. And you can contribute that to a lot of things. Like KK Short was out. He got hurt in the second game against the Bucs. He was out for the entire season. Top 5 defensive end, defensive tackle, whatever you want to label him as. So Derek Brown was a great pick for Carolina. We all know this may not be a great season. We may win 4 or 5 games at the most. We don't really know what to expect from Matt Rule coming in from Baylor and Temple. He's a program builder, so it may be a few years. But when you think about it like this, looking at the offensive troop right now, offensive core, DJ Moore, 9th in receiving yards last year. He's only 23. Robbie Anderson coming over from the Jets. Good quality wide receiver. Curtis Samuel, in my opinion, one of the most underrated players in the entire league. I think he can be a poor man's Tyreek Hill if given the opportunity. Offensive line is a little bit iffy. We did trade Trey Turner for Russell Okung. Okung's a proven left tackle, dealt with injuries a little bit last year, but this is the first franchise left tackle that I can think of that Carolina's had in the last 10 years since Jordan Gross retired. The player that I'm even more excited about than Derek Brown, Jeremy Chin. Carolina had to trade back up into the 2nd round to get him. Listed as a strong safety on this depth chart. But I think he can be like Isaiah Simmons. Came from a very small school, didn't get a lot of exposure, was a 0-star recruit coming out of high school. He is a freak of nature. When you watch him play, you get vibes of Ed Reed and the Honey Badger and different things. He does things so well. So I think that he's a type of player you can put him into the box, see if he can stop the run. He's big. He's a bigger style safety. He can also get back, intercept the ball. The problem maybe. He'll be going up against a little bit better tier athletes now in the NFL rather than smaller college athletes. So we'll have to see if he can stand up to the speed, athleticism that NFL players possess. But I'm going to say it right now. Jeremy Chin is one to look out for. Could be a safety cornerstone for the Panthers for a long time. I'm going to give the Panthers a B+ for this because I think they did a good job not fully reaching, and they filled spots that they needed while also kind of going with that best player available mentality.
To me, when you look at this draft class, I do agree with you. There were a lot of situations where Derek Brown, as I mentioned, a spectacular player in his own right. This is a draft that really reminds me more so of filling holes, taking the best available player to fill holes on a team instead of taking the best player available or drafting a player specifically by their position. I think the stars aligned a little bit in the sense that a lot of the best players available when the Panthers were picking were holes that they needed to fill. Derek Brown, as you mentioned, Yetur Gross-Matos from Penn State. I think that was a great pick for them in the second round. As you mentioned, Jeremy Chin, a very underrated pick in the second round. Southern Illinois, as you mentioned, not a Power 5 school, not a big name school, but when you look at the NFL as a whole, it really doesn't matter in the end what college you go to. It depends on what athleticism you hold and the intelligence. And as you mentioned, they do lose Luke Kuechly this offseason, so they will be missing one of the best linebackers to ever play the game. But with this draft class, I like the sense that I don't think their defense got much worse, if any. So to me, they get a solid B+ as well for the position they drafted in and the talent they drafted. They were able to fill in a lot of holes while also, again, getting the best available talent that they had at their disposal. With the next team, we've got the Chicago Bears, a team that we were talking a couple years ago could run the NFC North for a while, and we've never really seen any improvement from Mitchell Trubisky. They do get Cole Kmet in the second round out of Notre Dame, a tight end. They didn't have a ton of picks in this draft as well, only had about 7 picks, which really isn't that much for a team in a normal draft. So Underwood, your thoughts on the Bears draft with the little amount of picks they had?
They have roughly 8 or 9 tight ends on their roster. And just bringing in Jimmy Graham, it's an odd pick for me to see them go tight end right there. We know their defense. Their defense is good enough to hold you to 10 points a game, 13 points a game. Insane defensive line. Eddie Goldman, Akeem Nicks, Khalil Mack, obviously, Danny Trevathan at the linebacker spot, Roquan Smith. You can go on for forever talking about their defense. Their offense, it's kind of lackluster. Allen Robinson's a very underrated receiver. I will say that. Cordero Patterson is what he is. He's a return specialist. He may see some time at wide receiver. You never really know. Offensive line's okay, I guess. Running back, you do have David Montgomery and Tariq Cohen. I think the problem with their running game is that they're kind of similar players. I know David Montgomery runs a little bit angrier, if you would, than Tariq Cohen. Tariq Cohen's more of a finesse player. He's 5'6". He gets out in space. He breaks tackles, makes you miss, and things like that. But I feel like tight end wasn't the way to go. They needed to get maybe another playmaker. Maybe they have a strategy for the Nick Foles Trubisky battle that's coming up. But you have to think, if there's only 1 year in Trubisky's contract, that they're going to play him out through this season and see if he's worthy of being re-signed. I know they turned down his option, so there is a chance he is a free agent coming up. But I don't know. I'm going to have to give him a C- just because I really don't see the plan going with tight end when you already have 8 others on your roster.
I do agree with you. It doesn't make any sense in any type of way that the Bears would take a tight end in the second round. Cole Kmet is a solid tight end at Notre Dame. No one's questioning his talent or if he's going to be a decent tight end. It's just not a good situation because, as we just said, the Bears have so many tight ends. There's no reason for them to take that. Along with on their offensive end, there are so many different holes they had. I think they need to improve the offensive line. I'm not saying that I think Trubisky's entire struggles are based on the offensive line. It doesn't really help things, though. The Bears, considering they were very, very below expectations last year, I'm going to actually give them a D flat, because, again, they don't get better to me. And that's obviously the main point of a draft is you want to get better than what you were the year before, or at least set yourself up in the future. To me, they checked neither of those boxes, and they get a D from me going into the 2020 season. Up next, we've got the Cincinnati Bengals, had the number 1 pick in the draft. Joe Burrow is who they took, quarterback out of LSU, who had one of the most prolific seasons ever. I mean, the dude was unstoppable for the Tigers en route to a national championship, taking it back to Baton Rouge. They get T. Higgins with the first pick of the second round as well, and Logan Wilson, a linebacker out of Wyoming, in the third round. Underwood, the Bengals, what do you think?
Yeah, the Bengals, they got Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow had arguably the greatest season as always, a quarterback. They get T. Higgins out of Clemson, so they do have that. AJ Green, whether he wants to be in Cincinnati or not, is still a good wide receiver. He has those injuries that have held him back in the years past. He little tiff about if he does want to play for the Bengals, they kind of holding him hostage in a way. But you really can't miss when you draft Joe Burrow. Obviously, there have been busts at the number one spot. Quarterbacks haven't really panned out to be what they were thought to be. Ryan Leaf comes to mind, obviously. But I think Joe Burrow is a very safe pick. They could have maybe took Tua, but I think the way they stand right now is Joe Burrow is the safest pick to go. They needed a quarterback, Andy Dalton. It's time to get rid of him. T. Higgins, maybe a slower wide receiver. I think it's kind of funny the way they have AJ Green and T. Higgins. They do have John Ross, obviously the speedster making for it, but T. Higgins is sort of AJ Green in another universe, if that makes sense. Green's maybe a little bit more athletic. So for that, just for the fact they do get a top-tier quarterback and a A-rated, B-rated receiver, I'm going to go ahead and give them a B+. They're building their team. They next year, they may win 3 games at the most. We don't know. But in the future, they may be a team to watch out for.
This team right here, the Bengals coming into the AFC North. The AFC North is looking to be pretty competitive for the most part, in the sense that the Ravens are probably going to be the best team in the AFC. I don't think it's really a secret. The Steelers have a defense that really turned some heads last year, especially getting Minkah Fitzpatrick. And if the Browns can ever figure it out, this team is going to be dangerous as well with the weapons they have. The Bengals were one of the worst teams in the AFC. Obviously the worst team in the NFL last year with the record that they had. But Joe Burrow coming in at the first pick, I like what you said there, because I think potential-wise, if every player plays the best of their ability and is the best version of them that we possibly get. That's not going to happen because that's not how football works. But if that were to happen, I think Tua Tagovailoa might be the best quarterback in this draft. However, given the injury questions, given the steadiness, the inconsistency you're looking for, Joe Burrow had to be the pick here. A local guy, an Ohio kid, they get him at the number 1 pick. T. Higgins, I think, was a great pick in the second round. Thought he may have been able to get picked later on, but instead they take their guy with the first pick in the second round. With that being said, the draft that they had, I give that a B+ as well, because it's a safe draft. Nothing that really jumps off the page by all means, but as you mentioned, they're building their team. They're setting themselves up to be in a good position in the future. So the Cincinnati Bengals, from both of us, a B+ draft grade. Up next, as I just mentioned, the Cleveland Browns. If they could ever figure things out, they would be such a great team. However, they haven't been able to do that so far. They picked Jedrick Wills, offensive tackle out of Alabama, in the first round. Fun fact for him, out of over 600 career passing attempts, only gave up 1 sack in his career with the Crimson Tide. Jacob Underwood, the Cleveland Browns, do they improve with this draft class?
That's a good question. When you get a premier offensive lineman, it never hurts. Offensive linemen are always at a premium. Saw a lot of things that said that they might try Wills at a guard position to start out with. Has a lot of power, so he may play guard off the rip. Cleveland's in a very interesting position. If you remember about a year ago at this time, everybody was excited. Cleveland, they got OBJ. They had talented receivers. They had a good offensive line. And then Baker does what Baker does. And, he kind of fell apart. And a lot of people say it wasn't him. He was put in a bad situation. But Baker definitely had a sophomore slump. He definitely took a step back. So Cleveland Brown fans have to be left wondering what exactly their team is going to look like. I don't think they got a whole lot better. I don't think they took huge steps forward. They definitely got incrementally better. They got a good offensive lineman, a decent safety, some defensive line depth. Yeah, so for that, I'm just going to have to give them a C+ until we see the plan. If it comes to premier safety, top tier, then that'll definitely have to increase. I'll admit that I'm wrong. But out of their whole draft class, I see right now they have 1 guaranteed starter and maybe a rotational hybrid safety.
And that's right, folks. We here at Hot Takes with Holmes, we are willing to admit when we do make mistakes. We are not Nick Wright. When you talk about this draft class, Jedrick Wills, I think, is a good pick for them. I don't know if I don't know if I see the going to guard position working out 100%, but if there's anybody that's going to be able to do it, it is Wills. Wills is a very talented pass blocker in particular. As you said, a lot of people are saying it's not really Baker's fault. Baker didn't really have a great situation, but to me, his line wasn't anything spectacular by all means, but what better situation can you need when you've got a running back in Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt? You've got Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry on the outside. the receiving core and the weapons were just insane. His line wasn't anything spectacular, but I truly believe Baker Mayfield wasn't the same. He was worse as a sophomore, in fact, much worse as a sophomore than he was a rookie, which is not a good sign for the Cleveland Browns. If they can get improvement off of rookie year Baker Mayfield, then this team should be just fine. If they can't, that's going to be a question mark going into this season. I think Wills was a good pick for them at the 10th position. I kind of thought he might go actually at number 4 to the New York Giants, but they drafted Andrew Thomas instead. Delpit, solid pick for especially for a second round pick safety. Like you said, have a few question marks on the tackling ability, but it'll be interesting to see how he can translate to the Browns defense, which we know if the Browns defense is playing at the best of their ability, they are a force to be reckoned with. No one in particular really jumps off the page for the rest of it, except for I do like Donovan Peoples-Jones was an underrated receiver out of Michigan in his college career, and they get him in the 6th round. So a good value pick for the 6th round there. To me, just because I don't necessarily see what their direction is, and it all just depends on what Baker Mayfield does. I'm going to give them also a C+ because, again, we don't really know. Cleveland, what's your plan? What are you going to be doing in the upcoming future that's going to improve your position and maybe even sneak to the playoffs for the first time? I believe it's like 2003. So with that being said, going on to the next one, the Dallas Cowboys. I will start this off by saying they got CeeDee Lamb with their first pick, and that is incredible to me because I expected him to drop. I expected him to get picked like the 9th pick. They get him at 17, along with a few other great picks. Our good friend Anthony First Now is probably listening. Jacob Underwood, your draft grade for the Cowboys.
Yeah, they got CeeDee Lamb. He was 1 or 2 in a lot of people's wide receiver rankings. I think Jerry Jeudy is a little bit more of a crisper route runner, might have a little bit more success, but that's not a knock on CeeDee Lamb. Jerry Jeudy's a tremendous receiver. So picking him at the value they got him, I think they picked 17th. So getting CeeDee Lamb at the 17th pick is outstanding value. What they did on defense is picked a lot of depth players. Neville Gallimore probably isn't going to start. They did pick up Dontari Poe and Gerald McCoy, taking both of Carolina's defensive tackles. Poe's an older player. In my opinion, he's not to the level he once was where he was throwing touchdown passes. Maybe he can be a mentor to Neville Gallimore. Gallimore had the size, the strength to be there. So maybe that's what they get in Gallimore, a player who can build and grow into that starting tackle nose role. They do get 2 corners, Reggie Robinson and Trayvon Diggs. Interestingly enough, both players are sort of the same. They are aggressive. They play physical style. They want to get up. They want to man pressure. They want to hit you at the line of scrimmage. Physical course. Don't think either of them are going to start. I think that we may see them in a nickel role or maybe a backup cornerback role. I think probably Anthony Brown and Awuzie are going to be the 2 starters. But who knows? Trayvon Diggs may slide in there, and he made that starting cornerback spot away from Anthony Brown. Simply for that, I think they did a good job. I'm going to have to give them a B+ for draft.
I think CeeDee Lamb falling at the 17th pick was just incredible. Like I said, and the reason I say that was in my original mock draft that I made for myself, I expected CeeDee Lamb to not fall any farther than the Las Vegas Raiders. They threw us all a curveball and picked Henry Ruggs with the pick that they had. CeeDee Lamb is a rack specialist, really. You get him open in space, you give him a 15, have him run that 7-yard slant. He's got potential to take it to the house every time. And you look at the Cowboys receiving core, they didn't necessarily need a guy that was going to go up and get the football. They have Amari Cooper, they have Michael Gallup for that. But CeeDee Lamb, get him on a drag route, get him on a 4-yard slant. He's got the ability to try to take it for big yardage every single time he touches the ball. Trayvon Diggs, a solid corner in the 2nd round, the number 1 corner out of for the Crimson Tide. We know how tough their defense is every single year. He comes in, as you mentioned, trying to slide into maybe a slot corner role. Neville Gallimore falling in the 3rd round. This was a guy a lot of people were talking about potentially going in the 2nd round, but he goes to the Cowboys out of Oklahoma. I like this draft class. I think that the Cowboys did improve by a considerable margin. That offense is going to be very, very tough. With this offense, Dallas should be very, very good. I'm giving them the same grade of a B+. The next grade that we're going to be giving is the Denver Broncos. Folks, what an offensive draft the Denver Broncos had, drafting 3 wide receivers for their young quarterback in Drew Lock. We talked a little bit off air between myself and Underwood saying that this was going to be an interesting year because we have yet to see how good Drew Lock really is. Now he gets Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler out of Alabama and Penn State respectively. You just heard Jacob Underwood talk about Jerry Jeudy, and now you're going to hear what his draft grade is.
Yeah, I despise the Denver Broncos. Super Bowl 50 was rigged 100%, but I absolutely love this draft class. They actually have the highest rated draft class for me. Jerry Jeudy, outstanding. He's my number 1 receiver. Pairing him with KJ Hamler, the speedster, he can fly. And also, remember, they already have Cortland Sutton, who exploded last year in a situation where they really didn't have a whole lot of offensive talent. He was one of the main focuses on offense. They bring in Melvin Gordon, who maybe it remains to be seen what type of running back we get from him. Will he be later in last season's Chargers version, or will he be when he was rushing for 1,000 yards and he was a monster? We don't know that. But they got 3 offensive starters in their draft. Jerry Jeudy is definitely going to start at wide receiver. KJ Hamler can also start as a slot wide receiver. And Lloyd Cushenberry is going to start at that center position. I'm actually going to give them an A simply because they got 3 starters, and I believe they improved their offense greatly by giving Drew Lock 2 more targets to perfect his craft with.
Folks, this draft class is one that I look at, and from top to bottom, I don't know if it's possible for the Broncos to have had a better draft class than they did. You just said Cortland Sutton. Cortland Sutton was a very underrated receiver last year and looking to improve in this next season. Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. You have 3 different receivers that can go out and go up and get a football. But Hamler's not quite going to be the athletic guy that's going to go up and win a bunch of jump balls. But as you said, absolute speedster in the slot. You're talking about also, they get Melvin Gordon. They also have Philip Lindsay still. That's a heck of a running back punch there between Melvin Gordon and Philip Lindsay. Both a bit of on the elusive side, but interesting to see what Denver can do. I think their offense is going to be spectacular in the upcoming season. A dark horse, no pun intended, playoff contender coming up out of the AFC West this year. And because of, as you mentioned, all the reasons you just gave, as far as getting 3 different offensive starters, improving the defense a little bit more, I'm going to give them actually an A+, because again, I don't think that the Broncos could have possibly had a better draft than they did, picking at the position they did. Jerry Jeudy falling to them was incredible. And Drew Lock, it remains to be seen if he's going to be able to do anything with his receivers, but he's got to be happy with what his front office did in the draft this year. Up next, the Detroit Lions. This team had the 3rd pick. I kind of thought they were going to try to trade out of that 3rd pick, but instead they do make the pick. They get Jeff Okudah, cornerback out of Ohio State, who, as I mentioned earlier, I think is the best cornerback in this draft. So a good pickup there. I'll kind of talk about that in a little bit, but Underwood, your thoughts on the Lions?
Yeah, you really can't go wrong with Jeff Okudah. A lot of people said he was the best prospect they've graded coming out of college since Jalen Ramsey. I don't think he'll be quite Jalen Ramsey. Jalen Ramsey is a very special player, but he can come in and start right now. He's probably going to be their cornerback 1. Their 1st-round pick, great. The questions come after the 1st round, in which they get DeAndre Swift. And DeAndre Swift's a solid running back. He lacks a little bit of vision, I think. I think he's a tremendous athlete, but they already had Kerryon Johnson, who was becoming a premier running back. Maybe not elite level, but he was extremely serviceable. He was coming into his own. They also have Bo Scarborough and Ty Johnson. And for those really hardcore football fans, they remember Ty Johnson had to come in later in the season, and he actually handled himself decently well. So I understand why they would want someone as polarizing as DeAndre Swift. But I feel like the way their offense is set up right now, they have good wide receivers. Maybe help out the offensive line. Maybe go a little bit more defensive line, linebacker, depending on who was available at that time. But I just don't feel like running back was the pick. For that, I'm going to give them a C-. Great 1st-round pick, but everything after that was just meh for me.
When you're talking about the Lions right here, and that 1st-round pick, it was a good 1st-round pick. I was kind of expecting the Lions to kind of trade away from that 3rd pick and maybe pick up some more draft capital later on or get some important pieces. I think that was the right pick to make, though. They did lose Darius Slay in the offseason to the Eagles, so Jeff Okudah will slide right in and start in the secondary. And DeAndre Swift, as you mentioned, I'm just one. I've talked about it as much as I have. I think J.K. Dobbins is the best running back in this class, at least from what I've seen and where they stand coming out of college. But in the case of the Lions specifically, it really did turn into a head scratcher why they drafted a running back. As you mentioned, Kerryon Johnson, very, very good running back coming out of college, or excuse me, a very, very good running back coming into this season. Bo Scarborough, a monster in his own right. It didn't make any sense for the Lions, and I think majority of their holes are on the defensive end. If you're going to pick anything in the offense, they did address that, picking Jonah Jackson and Logan Stenberg, 2 offensive guards, but I think they could have done more on the offensive end. I will give them a C+, just because if DeAndre Swift turns out to be who he could be, then it could be a great thing for the Lions. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to pick him, especially when they did. So they get a C+, and that's generous for the Lions. The next team, we've got the Green Bay Packers, made the most surprising move in the first round, trading up to get Jordan Love at the 26th pick, a quarterback out of Utah State, while Aaron Rodgers is still on the roster. Jacob Underwood, your thoughts on the Packers draft?
F, fail, flunk. Yeah, the Aaron Rodgers is still a very good quarterback. He is old. I believe he's 35 right now, so he's on the downward end of his career. They do need to find his replacement. However, Jordan Love turns the football over way too much. And obviously that can change as you get into the NFL. But he's already turning it over at an outstanding clip in college. Aaron Rodgers is famous for not turning the football over. Really throws interceptions, actually leads the league every year in throwaways because he doesn't like to take a whole lot of risks. He'll rather throw the ball away and live to play another down, as they say. They don't want to give him any playmakers. Devontae Adams is outstanding. Valdez-Scantling, he's good. They did bring in Devin Funchess, who Packers fans will quickly learn he's not all that he is made out to be, and then Equanimous St. Brown. So a decent offensive wide receiver core. But yeah, I feel like Jordan. I know what they're trying to do. They are trying to do the Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers take two, and hopefully they strike again. I think they could have got Jordan Love maybe even in the third round. I don't think he was the player that they expect him to be. So yeah, definitely an F. If he turns out to be the next Aaron Rodgers, I'll change it to an A. But for right now, they have the lowest grade for me in the draft.
Looking at this draft class, it is just insanely weird because this is a team on the offensive end, even though there were some question marks here and there about a true number 2 receiver potentially behind Devontae Adams. You look at this team, and it was mainly their defense that needed help. They didn't draft a defensive player till the 5th round. That says something about the direction they're going. And you mentioned Aaron Rodgers and not turning the ball over. Fun fact for those at home, Aaron Rodgers from 2005 to 2019 has the lowest interception percentage ever. Ever. And it's not even close. The closest person to him is Carson Wentz. 1.7% of his passes get picked off. Folks, Aaron Rodgers, out of all the passes he's thrown, has only 1.4% of his passes being picked off in a Packers uniform. That is unbelievable when you look at it. And this is a guy who in his career has over 6,000 passing attempts. That says something about the clip that he turns the ball over. He does not like to put it in too many tight spots. He likes to play conservatively. Jordan Love loves to push the ball down the field, tries to make plays when he probably shouldn't. I'm giving this draft a D- just because I think in the end, you've got some potentially interesting pieces here, but let's be real. They want Aaron Rodgers. I don't think they're getting that in Jordan Love, especially trading up to get him. Not a fan of that, but I'll be generous here and give him a D-. Definitely one of the worst classes, as you mentioned, in the entire league. Next, the Houston Texans, who I mentioned the Bengals had very few picks. They had 5 picks. Ross Blacklock goes at defensive tackle out of TCU with their 2nd-round pick, and Jonathan Greenard was the defensive end for Florida. I'm going to go ahead and start things off this time just because I have a little bit of an insight what I do for this. I am going to go ahead and give this draft a D+ because I think Ross Blacklock is a very solid pick for the defensive end, for the defensive line, along with Jonathan Greenard. But I refuse to give the Houston Texans credit for anything, considering the horrible trade they made for DeAndre Hopkins. They could have had potentially a better situation with this draft and DeAndre Hopkins. But instead, you're telling me you traded DeAndre Hopkins and you got back David Johnson, solid running back, maybe a little bit past his prime, and Ross Blacklock for it. D+, and I think I might be being a little bit generous.
When you put it like that, yeah, they definitely lose the draft. Like Ross Blacklock, seen a lot of him play at TCU. I'm a West Virginia fan, so I see him in the Big 12. He's a solid run stopper, nose tackle. He can get pressure on the quarterback, but he's not to the level of DeAndre Hopkins. And would DeAndre Hopkins have left after his contract year? Possibly, maybe. But you can't tell me that there wasn't a single better offer on the table for a top 3, arguably, wide receiver. None of the people that they drafted are going to be starters. Ross Blacklock possibly could be a starter, but they also have J.J. Watt, who slides around that defensive line. They do have Angelo Blackson. So, I mean, maybe Blacklock ends up starting at that nose tackle spot. Maybe he doesn't. Linebacking core is pretty decent. They have Zach Cunningham, Bernardrick McKinney, Whitney Merciless. Secondary struggles at times. So, yeah, I mean, I understand where they're going from. They didn't have a whole lot of picks. Maybe Blacklock was the top player remaining on their board. They probably could have went secondary and helped out Justin Reed. He's probably the only very talented player in that secondary. But, yeah, I'm going to give him a D just because Blackhawks a good pick. They really didn't make a whole lot out of their draft. They didn't have that many picks. They signed a few undrafted free agents that might make the team. So yeah, another low grade. Didn't maximize the low picks even that they did have.
The Indianapolis Colts are next. And in this draft class, they do get Michael Pittman, a receiver out of USC, Jonathan Taylor, running back out of Wisconsin, and Julian Blackman, a safety out of Utah. Underwood, what's your thoughts on the Colts draft?
Marlon Mack last year had a career year running the football simply because of that offensive line. I think that I could have got back there and ran for at least 750 yards last season. When you get Jonathan Taylor, you get into that cycle of Wisconsin running backs that into the league, and is he going to be Gordon or is he going to be somebody else? Doesn't quite pan out. There have been a ton of Wisconsin running backs that look the deal in college to get to the NFL, and then they kind of flare out. Just like we talked about before, there have been other times where they get in the NFL and then they do fantastic. So Marlon Mack probably going to be the starter. Jonathan Taylor, maybe a third down situation running back. They still have Nyheim Hines, who was really good last year. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and give them a C+ simply because Pittman's an okay pickup. Jonathan Taylor's good. They didn't get a whole lot better with this. They did bring in a lot of talent through free agency. DeForest Buckner, Xavier Rhodes coming over. So they do have the X-Man. As long as he's previous year's Xavier Rhodes and not last year's version of Xavier Rhodes, they should be fine on defense with Darius Leonard leading brigade from the linebacker spot.
There's one thing that this team tells me with this draft class, and I don't know if it should be, if this is the way I should be taking it, but Jacob Eason being taken in the 4th round, that makes me question of whether or not they think Jacoby Brissett is in the future or not. Eason, a quarterback who originally started off in Georgia, transferred to Washington, played really well in the Pac-12, got drafted in the 4th round. This makes me think that he's very similar to a Phillip Rivers, and I think Phillip Rivers at most has 2 more years in the NFL before he does call it quits. In my opinion, one of the more underrated quarterbacks in NFL history. I've never seen a quarterback have more situations of 30 seconds to go down at your own 10 and no timeout. You got to go score. So he's had some bad situations here and there, but as you mentioned, as long as he's serviceable, as long as he's a decent quarterback for the Colts, they should be in a pretty decent situation. I give this draft class a B out of Indianapolis. The next one is the Jacksonville Jaguars. They had so many picks, a ton of picks. CJ Henderson was their first pick, a corner out of Florida. Underwood, the Jaguars, what are their draft class, and what do you think of their grade?
Yeah, so the Jaguars, I believe, are probably in tank territory. They're probably not going to win a whole lot of games next year. They do have, they have a good offensive line. Cam Robinson, Andrew Norwell, Brandon Linder, AJ Cann, Jawan Taylor. That's a good offensive line. Defensively, they're rebuilding. Yannick Ngakoue, it's pretty obvious now if you follow either of them on Twitter, the general manager or Yannick Ngakoue. He doesn't want to be there. He wants to be let go. He wants to go somewhere else. They brought in Josh Allen. So if Ngakoue does stay, they have Josh Allen and Yannick on both sides. That's pretty scary. Avery Jones, Taven Bryan in the middle. Miles Jack, Chiazon, and then Henderson. I'm going to go ahead and give them a B simply because they got good players. They got Henderson. They got Chiazon. And they are what they are at this point. They're probably going to lose a bunch of games, but they're building for the future. So I'm going to go ahead and put them in that number 1 pick watch. I believe they're probably going to win 3 or 4 games this year.
I have to agree with you. I don't think this team is going to be very successful in the upcoming season, but I don't think they want to be very successful. When you look at the class that they did, and I was kind of surprised that we didn't see, I will be incredibly surprised if Yannick Ngakoue stays on the roster in the upcoming season. I also would not be surprised to see Leonard Fournette be moved as well. But when you look at this roster, their defense, we were talking a few years ago being the best in the league. Now they're one of the worst. CJ Henderson comes in a late rise in the draft class, not a bad position to get him at. And Chiazon, a defensive end, like I said, I think he can replace Yannick Ngakoue when they eventually do trade him, because it's clear based on that Twitter rant, he wants nothing to do with Jacksonville anymore. I'm going to give them a B as well, because again, they're not trying to get anything that's going to make them jump off the page, because if they can get that number 1 pick next year, they do get potentially Trevor Lawrence, and that is going to be an interesting situation. So considering they did what they set out to do, I'm giving them a B as well. Up next, the Kansas City Chiefs. They kind of shocked me a little bit. I'm not saying that this is a bad pick by any means. The first pick they got, Clyde Edwards-Helaire out of LSU, with the last pick in the first round, kind of surprised me a little bit just because he wasn't the first running back that I expected to go off the board. However, I think they addressed a need, trying to get get a receiving back, and I think they did that in Edwards-Helaire. So your draft grade for the Andy Reid-led Kansas City Chiefs.
Exactly what you said. They didn't. I wouldn't say they reached, but they did fill a need with Edwards-Helaire. They do have Damian Williams and Darwin Thompson still running the football. So even if Edwards-Helaire is only a third down back or he's a receiving back, they bring him in, they put him in motion, move him to the slot. Kansas City really couldn't lose. I believe I read some weird stat that they returned like 20 out of their 22 starters or 21 out of 22 starters, whatever it may be. But yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and give them a B. I don't think they could have gotten any better or really gotten worse with this draft. So pretty middle of the pack. B. We'll see what Edwards-Helaire does for the Chiefs this year.
The first pick was one that when it first happened, I was kind of confused at when it happened. I'll get into another pick like that later on. This was when it first came out, I was kind of confused in what Kansas City was doing because, again, they had Damian Williams, who made a case for Super Bowl MVP. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes took home that award, probably the best quarterback in the NFL. And the other side of things, the secondary could potentially be better. But when your offense is putting up 35, 40 points a game, you can make the case, well, sometimes offense really does win championships. And that's exactly what Kansas City did this past season. Edwards-Helaire, the more I read about it and the more I really thought about it, the more I thought this was actually a very, very good pick for the Kansas City Chiefs, because I think at this point you have to assess the talent that was available. And they thought, we could go cornerback, but Helaire is close enough to what we want, whereas maybe the talent disparity in the next cornerback they wanted was actually a decent amount. That is still going to be an issue. They didn't improve the secondary, basically. They only drafted one cornerback, and it was Thakarius Keys out of Tulane in the 7th round. I'm giving them a B+, though. I think that considering what they had available and what they were looking to do, again, the biggest thing about judging a draft to me is what did a team set out to do? And I think Kansas City did exactly what they wanted to in a sense. However, still a glaring issue in the secondary. I'm giving them a B+ in this upcoming draft. The Las Vegas Raiders, in their first year in Vegas, led by the greatest coach of all time, and John Gruden, they completely turned everybody's head. Same way they did the year before. They drafted Cleveland Farrell at number 4 in the year before. Now they draft Henry Ruggs before any other receiver at number 12. Underwood, I'll just leave it up to you because I know how much you love John Gruden in his decision making. What are your thoughts on the Raiders draft?
I'm happy John Gruden got a contract as a coach because I don't have to hear him in the booth anymore with his Spider 2Y, Y2 banana, whatever it was. Blake can tell you. He's an expert on it. Henry Ruggs, I mean, he's fast. That's what he is. He runs. He's tremendous athlete. He's got John Ross speed. If anyone else in the league has it, it's probably Ruggs. I don't really doubt John Gruden. I mean, last year they started off rough, almost made the playoffs. I believe they finished 7-9. So maybe he has a method to his madness. Not who I would have taken if I was in the same situation. So just until Gruden proves to me what exactly his plan is, we're going to give him right out of the pack. I'm going to give him a C. Maybe he pulls everything together, but right now, seems like he's putting a lot of odds and ends picks and just hoping they pan out, in my opinion.
He is one. This is a team that confuses me because it's both years that John Gruden has been a head coach for the Raiders so far, at least in this stint. They've made a questionable first pick to me, but then they kind of make a good pick with their second first-round pick. I like Damon Arnett. Getting him at the 19th pick, I like that. Same reason as, again, they picked Cleveland Farrell with the 4th pick in last year's draft and then got Josh Jacobs towards the end of that first round. I think Ruggs is going to be solid. To me, this also says that they see something in either Derek Carr or Marcus Mariota, who they did bring in from Tennessee this offseason. I think Mariota is actually a dark horse, probably take that starting position away from Carr. They obviously see something in him that they really like. So Henry Ruggs going in the first round. I'm giving this a C+. I also think they took a very underrated receiver, in my opinion, is Brian Edwards, a wide receiver out of South Carolina. I saw him every single season as a Tennessee fan playing against South Carolina every year. Solid receiver in his own right. I'm giving them a C+, just because I think this class has the potential to become a lot better in their grade. But for now, until, as you said, it's proven, keeping them middle of the pack, C+. The Los Angeles Chargers, they got their franchise guy potentially with their first pick and the sixth pick, Justin Herbert out of Oregon. This guy was a quarterback who right at the beginning, mid of last season, he was kind of mentioned a mid first round pick, maybe late first round pick. But towards the end of the season, into the draft combine, he shot up the board. And people were even saying that the Bengals could even trade down and try to get Justin Herbert. They get him at the 6th pick along with Kenneth Murray out of Oklahoma, a linebacker. Jacob Underwood, your thoughts on the Chargers draft?
I'm not actually a huge fan of Justin Herbert. I think the Chargers were quarterback or nothing in this draft. And once Tua went off the board, the pick before them, they were kind of forced into taking Herbert. Don't get me wrong. Herbert has probably the top 3 strongest arm in the NFL just now as a rookie. Can flat foot throw the ball 75 plus yards. Athleticism, he has enough of it to succeed. I think defensive coordinators are going to confuse him. I think he's going to struggle and throw a lot of interceptions this upcoming year. And that's really a shame because he doesn't have that bad of talent players around him. Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Joe Reed, who they just brought in, and Austin Eckler, who it remains to be seen what type of role Eckler will step into. You know, Melvin Gordon will be there. He'll probably be the primary running back. I mean, they needed a quarterback. They got one. So they got the need. Not who they wanted, in my opinion. They can say they wanted Herbert all along, but I think they wanted Joe Burrow and Tua. Obviously, Burrow wasn't going to fall once the Bengals locked in their pick, but it was kind of still a decision between the Dolphins and the Chargers who was going to end up with Tua and who was going to end up with Herbert. Kenneth Murray, outstanding linebacker. That was a very good pick. They needed somebody in the middle of that defense to kind of hold things down. I'm going to give them a B-.
Justin Herbert, if you told me to give a draft comparison, I know it's early to be comparing him to people, but to me, it's Josh Allen out of Buffalo because he's very raw. There's a lot of question marks that he may have, but he could be serviceable enough to try to help you win games. With that being said, is that worth a 6th round pick a 6th pick in the draft? Don't really know about that. I think they really, really, really wanted Tua Tagovailoa. And when the Dolphins picked him, which I think was the right pick for them, they do lose out, but they get Justin Herbert, who is, I think, will be solid. I think he'll be okay. I don't think he will contend for best quarterback in this draft by all means. Kenneth Murray, as you mentioned, was a need for them. I think I'm going to give them a B- because they addressed some needs, but again, this team isn't going to be in a good position as far as playoff seedings. I'm giving them a B- for their efforts in the draft. The Los Angeles Rams, new logo. As we look at this draft class right here, they did draft a good amount of players. They do lose Todd Gurley in the offseason to the Atlanta Falcons, but they draft Cam Akers with their first pick of the draft in the 2nd round out of Florida State. Underwood, your thoughts on Sean McVay's vision with this draft class?
Yeah, I love Sean McVay. I think he's a wonderkind. I think he is revolutionary. He understands the game very well. I think Jared Goff is a lower tier quarterback. I think he limits what this offense can do. The biggest issue, Blake, and you failed to mention it, is that they have a new kicker. Greg DeLeg is not there anymore. So they go into the draft, take Sam Sloman. There's a new kicker in LA. So yeah, just because of that new kicker, I'm gonna have to give them a B+. Also, Blake, Eric Dickerson hates it. What do you think of the new logo?
I don't really know what to think of it. It's very confusing to me because when you look at it, you know, every other team in the league. This goes for any professional sports league. If you want to correct me or say I'm wrong, send it to me on Twitter. I don't care. Every other sports logo you see, at least you can kind of guess what the team name is based on the logo. The Rams, I have absolutely no idea what their team name is when I look at their logo. You look at any league, any team you could possibly think about, you can kind of guess what their team would be. I don't see it. I can't figure it out. So, but you mentioned Sam Sloman goes to the Los Angeles Rams, the 4th player out of Miami, Ohio, in their team's history. I think Cam Akers is a interesting choice. Obviously not Todd Gurley, but it's going to be an interesting situation. You've got a number of different running backs out there. Yeah, they did fill a little bit of holes, and they were trying to go through again, trying to fill holes. I think I'm going to give them a C-. I think they could have done a little bit more, but they also could have been a lot worse if we're being completely honest. And plus, the kicker's name is Sam Slowman. I mean, you can't have a slow man at the kicker position. So they get a C- from me. Exactly. The Miami Dolphins, as we talked about, Tua Tagovailoa goes to them at the 5th pick. They had 3 first-round picks. There were a lot of people saying that they did not like this draft a little bit. Underwood, I'm gonna go ahead and get your thoughts before. What were your thoughts on the draft class that the Dolphins did bring in?
Yeah, I really liked the Tua pick. Tua Tagovailoa, if he's healthy, I think he has to start over Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick's a gunslinger. He'll win you 6 games in a row, and then he'll lead the league in interceptions with 4 a game. So he's a good mentor for Tua. I think Tua may have been the best overall quarterback in the league. I think if you compare him and Joe Burrow, that they're a lot closer than some people think. The injury really derailed Tua's final season. Actually put it in doubt if he was ever going to play again. So if I'm the Dolphins and he's healthy and he can play, I'm definitely going to start him. On defense, they get a cornerback. They bring in some defensive line depth. I think just with the Tua pick, that gets at least a B from me. And we're going to keep it right at B. Probably could have got a little bit better value with the rest of their picks. Miami, again, another team probably not going to win a ton of games. They're probably going to be in the same position that the Cardinals were this past year, although I think the Cardinals may have had a little bit more talent on both sides of the football. Tua in the future could be an elite quarterback. It remains to be seen if he is healthy, how he plays. You know, there's obviously outliers. There are busts and things like that. But in my opinion, Tua and Joe Burrow were quarterback 1A and 1B. And my opinion flopped after each game I watched them play.
Tua Tagovailoa, if you go back in the offseason before the last season, it wasn't even close. The biggest thing, Tua Tagovailoa was the consensus number 1 pick before the injury, before Joe Burrow goes out and lights the world on fire. And again, before Tua gets hurt, he was seen as the clear number 1 pick. And I think that the talent is still there. Obviously, there's going to be some question marks following him with that injury. I think I also like the second-round pick of Raekwon Davis. I think was a very underrated defensive tackle for the Crimson Tide. I think Tua is that guy from Miami, and because of that, I'm giving them a B+ solely for that pick alone. I also, again, do like the Raekwon Davis and Austin Jackson picks. The rest of the picks could have done a little bit more. He could have drafted another receiver as far as that goes, but based on the pick that they did with Tua Tagovailoa, I'm giving them a B+ in the upcoming season. Next, the Minnesota Vikings, coached by Mike Zimmer, had a metric ton of draft picks in this draft. Justin Jefferson was their first pick, trying to replace Stephon Diggs out of LSU, and Jeff Gladney rounded out the first round with the 31st pick at corner out of TCU. Underwood, what do you think of this draft class, and where do you think it takes Minnesota?
You talked about how Stephon Diggs and the Vikings really weren't on the best of terms. Visible arguments between Diggs and Kirk Cousins after plays. Diggs wanted the ball. He's a very prolific wide receiver, so I understand where he was coming from. He did play alongside Adam Thielen, who demanded targets as well. Thielen more of a laid-back guy. In my opinion, you won't see him argue with Cousins, and not to take any away from his competitive fire, but it's just the difference in personality between them. Justin Jefferson, he was fine for LSU. He's another one of those fast wide receivers. But does he have the size to compete at an outside wide receiver position, or did they use a pick on a slot wide receiver that's going to come in only on special situations? He's listed at 6'1", 200 pounds. So maybe DeAndre Hopkins at the absolute best level ever. A lot of people don't know DeAndre Hopkins actually isn't one of the taller wide receivers. He's actually shorter compared to Julio Jones and other receivers of the taller stature, more like Odell Beckham in the shorter, speedier style. I think Justin Jefferson is a slot wide receiver. I don't think he can compete outside. On defense, I do like Jeff Gladney. They also got Cameron Dantzler. So they obviously were trying to beef up their secondary. We talked about earlier, they lost Xavier Rhodes. Still have Harrison Smith. Mike Hughes going to start at that other cornerback position. But decent draft. Justin Jefferson wasn't my favorite pick to replace the Viking or replace Stephon Diggs. I think they probably could have looked in free agency and gotten someone a lot or very similar to Jefferson and not have to use that early pick. I'm going to give him a C+ until Justin Jefferson proves that he can battle on the outside against the physical corners, especially playing in the division with some of the toughest environments. You play in Minnesota, Chicago, conditions aren't always the best. So you have to be a strong wide receiver, play through the football. And I'm not sure at this point in his career, Justin Jefferson could do that.
Justin Jefferson, we've said it a few times about how maybe some players are beneficiaries of playing with other players. I think Justin Jefferson might be that to an extent, because I think he wasn't even necessarily the best receiver on LSU, or he won't be the best receiver that was on that LSU roster, because I think Jamar Chase, who will be coming up, is going to be incredible. for LSU. So Justin Jefferson comes into the league, maybe a little bit of a beneficiary, stats a little bit inflated at that point, but still solid receiver. As over out, not going to say he's not Jerry Jeudy, I don't think, and he's not any of CeeDee Lamb or Henry Ruggs, but Jefferson, solid receiver. I think, like I said, I really like the pick with Gladney going into the secondary and Dantzler. Considering the draft class that they could have had, or as you said, could have went after somebody a little bit different with that first pick and tried to get somebody in for agency, I'm going to give them straight down the middle a C, because I don't really know. It could have been worse. It could have been better. It's just one of those draft classes that you look at, you just you don't really know what to think of it. Everyone's favorite team in the past 20 years, the New England Patriots. Bill Belichick is coming into his first season in a long time without Tom Brady. They had a lot of draft picks, but no first round picks, which is just the exact epitome of the New England Patriots, if I could ever think of that, because they find those late round gems all the time. Underwood, what are your thoughts in their draft class?
Bill Belichick, listen very closely to what I'm about to tell you. You're about to go into a season with Stidham and Brian Hoyer as your two options for quarterback. There is a 6'5" monster with something to prove on free agency. Go get Cam Newton. He's better than anything you have there. Cam Newton's a very polarizing figure. Yes, I get that he may not fit the Bill Belichick mold. I understand. But for people that don't follow Cam Newton very closely and they let him occasionally, they see him dance, they think he's some type of showboat athlete. That's really not the case. He works tremendously hard at his craft. His competitive fire is equal to anybody's in the league. If they get Cam Newton, the Patriots go from right now, they look bad on paper, if we're being completely honest. They have N'Keal Harry and Julian Edelman. Edelman's older. He can get you first downs, but he's really not going to take the top off the defense anymore. If they get Cam Newton, that's another weapon that the defense has to worry about. Like you mentioned, Anthony Jennings coming in, play that linebacker spot, maybe a big nickel situation. They bring in a tight end. And Bill Belichick does what he does. He actually drafted a place kicker out of Marshall. So I really never want to doubt Bill Belichick. I'm going to give him a C+ just for the fact that I never want to give him less than a C, because he'll find those late round gems. He found Gronkowski in, I believe, the second round. And Gronkowski turned into arguably top 3 greatest tight end of all time. And if you get that value in the second round, then there's obviously a method to your madness. So you know more than I do.
Let me paint the picture for those of us that are tired of seeing the Patriots winning, which I think is about all of us. This team, they may not be good this year, but I want you folks out there to realize that if they, and I think it would be in their best interest to go after a Cam Newton if they're looking to contend this year. If they get a first or second round pick, the first or second pick, they could end up with one of either Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields. This team that entirely revolved around a quarterback could get another quarterback. And that is terrifying to me. Again, I think if they're wanting to do well this season, or if they're even wanting to contend whatsoever, they need to go after a guy like Cam Newton in free agency. I don't really know if that's what they want to do, but at the same time, you could make the case Bill Belichick doesn't want to do that. Bill Belichick is probably the best coach of all time. He wants to contend in every single way. So I think Cam Newton is one to look out for. That's a team to look out for him to go to. As far as the draft class goes, I like the Anthony Jennings pick. Like I said, out of Alabama, I like him a lot. Dalton Keene, as you said, always hope a local guy goes and does things well in the league. And again, a place kicker at the fifth round pick. He's probably going to be a slot receiver, if we're being honest. I'm not going to doubt. I'm going to give him a C. I'm not going to doubt Bill Belichick by giving him anything less, but I don't see a ton of direct contributors in this upcoming class. So, Bill, if this is anybody else in the league, I would probably give them a D to D+, but you get a C because you're Bill Belichick. Up next, the other one of Jacob Underwood's favorite teams. Only 4 picks in the draft this year, the New Orleans Saints. They started off getting Cesar Ruiz out of Michigan, a center, also getting Zach Bond, a linebacker out of Wisconsin. And the other interesting pick, I'll let Underwood get into this a little bit because I know he's got a backstory with this, Tommy Stevens, a quarterback out of Mississippi State.
You mentioned Ruiz. He's a very solid interior offensive lineman. I think they're going to move him to guard. McCoy played very well for them last year. Interestingly enough, I think that they should replace Pete. They're not going to do it, I'd say. Andrews Pete struggled the last 2 years. Yes, he was injured. Had the broken arm, I believe. But they need to move Ruiz into Pete's spot and then slide Cameron into that right guard. They won't do that. They're going to replace Cameron, put Ruiz right there. He'll start in the interior offensive line. the story of Tommy Stevens is just more rivalry between the Panthers and the New Orleans Saints. Apparently, the Panthers had a deal in place with Tommy Stevens. They were going to sign him as an undrafted free agent after the draft. Sean Payton, most punchable face as a coach in the league, comes in, drafts him just to keep him away from the Panthers. And, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He might even get cut from the Saints coming up this year. They may try to Taysom Hill him, make him a playmaker. But yeah, just a little bit of extra spice in the fire that is the Saints versus Panthers rivalry. And we talk about it. The Saints are a good team, and you can't really take anything away from them. They're consistently in the playoffs. They lose tragically. I hate that for them. It's so bad. They almost get there every year, and then something happens. But their offense is fine. Michael Thomas, he broke the reception record. He runs 3 yards and catches the ball. I understand. Emmanuel Sanders, offensive line's fine. Jared Cook, Drew Brees. But yeah, they get Ruiz, a starting interior offensive lineman. He's really good. I'm going to give him a B simply because they're one of those teams you can't really get a whole lot better. And it's a sad sight, really, when you think that Drew Brees may be one of the players that hold back this offense. And I'm not trying to take away anything from Drew Brees. He's a great quarterback. He's one of the best of all time. But he's just at a point in his career where I personally feel like he holds back that offense a little bit with his inability to throw the football downfield.
I'm going to go ahead and spoil my pick. As far as my class grade, I also agree. I'm going to give them a B because I think Cesar Ruiz is a solid offensive lineman. They get him. And again, a team where they had no draft picks. I mean, there's not really much they can really do with it. There's not a whole lot they could have done with the draft picks they had to get better, but yet they still managed to do that even in a small capacity. So for what they had and what they were able to give up, I give them a B for this draft class. The next one is the New York Giants. Had the 4th pick in the first round, picked Andrew Thomas, a tackle out of Georgia. Then they get Xavier McKinney, a second round safety out of Alabama. Jacob Underwood, the Big Apple with their first team. What'd you think of their draft class?
Yeah, very familiar with Dave Gettleman from his time as general manager in Carolina. There's a specific type of player that Gettleman goes after. If you're not familiar, he calls them hog mollies. He loves the offensive and defensive linemen. A few years ago, he drafted Vernon Butler, who was a major bust for Carolina. But he goes with Andrew Thomas. And like we mentioned, maybe Wills was the pick there for a lot of teams. He goes with Andrew Thomas, a tremendous sized right tackle. And yeah, in my opinion, he wasn't the top right tackle or even tackle in general on the board. The Giants can get better. They have a great tight end. Evan Ingram, I believe, is very underrated. Their wide receiver core is mediocre at best. They do have Golden Tate, but Golden Tate's at the point of his career, in my opinion, where he's more of a name than a player. Yes, he used to be the rack god. He would go get yards after catch. He could do all that, but he's older now. He's not really the same player he was before. Sterling Shepard, he is what he is. He's a decent wide receiver. Really not too high on the Giants draft. I don't think that they got many people who are going to come right in and start. Maybe Xavier McKinney comes in and starts at that free safety position. Possibly, depends on where they view Jabril Peppers and Julian Love. I'm going to go ahead and give them a C-. They didn't take my top tackle on the board. They got a few offensive linemen for depth pieces. But really no help for Daniel Jones. And really, in my opinion, that's what they needed the most was more playmakers to go along with Saquon and Daniel Jones.
For 2 straight seasons, the Giants have had a draft that I'm not really a fan of. I will say, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt in this sense. Even though Jedrick Wills, I think, was the best tackle available, at least to me. I think Tristan Wirfs is also a very raw prospect, which could be a very good player. Andrew Thomas, to me, is the most pro-ready tackle in the state that he is. I don't think he's got the same ceiling. I don't think he's got the same potential that Wills and everybody has. But I think Gettleman, and this is where we disagree. Again, I don't think it's the worst pick in the world. But in the eyes of Dave Gettleman here, I don't think you should expect the Giants to contend next season. So why do you need to take the tackle that is the most pro-ready in that sense? I think Jedrick Wills was the pick here. For the second straight year, they get a below average grade. I'm giving them a D+. Because again, aside from Xavier McKinney, even the Andrew Thomas pick, who I don't hate that pick, I'm just not a fan of many of these picks. I don't think they were made with the Giants' future in mind. I think they are, maybe David Gettleman's thinking they're going to contend next year, which is just not the case. They get a D+ from me. Going to the other team in the Big Apple, the New York Jets, they drafted Mekhi Becton, a tackle out of Louisville, with the 11th pick. I think they really, really, really wanted Jedrick Wills, and they just weren't able to get him. Becton was the best tackle on the board at that point, so they went ahead and took him. Or the New York Jets, or as I like to call it, Florida 2.0, as they got Jabari Zuniga, LaMichael Pirine both out of Florida, and then James Morgan, a quarterback out of Florida International. Mind you, James Morgan taken before both Jacob Eason and Jake Fromm in the 4th round. I guess the idea was they wanted to get a stable backup, which I could see that in a sense. Sam Darnold is looking to be the quarterback of the future for the Jets, showed a lot of potential. Denzel Mims, a wide receiver out of Baylor. I think receiver was one of the positions they really wanted to address. And I almost personally would have rather it when Becton was the best tackle available, even though he is going to be a solid tackle in his own right. I think that I would have much rather seen them go after a guy like Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, and get him at the 11th pick. But instead, they go with Becton. They get Mims and kind of replace it a little bit better in the 2nd round pick. So I'll go ahead and start with my picks. I give them a B-. I don't see any major holes or major deficits, I should say, but there could have been a lot more that, and they could have knocked it out of the park a little bit better. Bryce Hall is also a decent pick in the 5th round from Virginia, a corner. Jacob Underwood, your thoughts as I give them a B-.
I wonder why Denzel Mims fell. I think he's a better wide receiver than Justin Jefferson, in my own opinion. Like you mentioned, Jamar Chase is probably already the best receiver in his draft class. So Justin Jefferson got the benefit of playing with that. If I ask you to name some of the Baylor star players or talented players around Denzel Mims, it's harder to do. He was the main focus of the defense and still was able to come away with outstanding seasons. A lot of people questioned his motor. They said whenever the going got tough, he kind of gave up. And I mean, I've seen that before watching Baylor play, but I don't think it warranted the fall that Denzel Mims took. They have Le'Veon Bell, maybe a little bit past his prime. They just brought in Frank Gore, who's never going to retire. He's the greatest 50-year-old running back we've ever seen in the history of the league. And Becton's a franchise left tackle, hopefully for the Jets. So you can really, like I said, you never go wrong getting a franchise left tackle. Their defense needs a little bit of work. They do have Jamal Adams, Pierre Desir. They bring in Bryce Hall, and Bryce Hall would have been a much higher pick had he not been faced with an injury and missed most of his senior season. He would have probably been 2nd or 3rd round, in my opinion. He's that talented. It'll just be interested to see if he can get back to the level he was playing at for Virginia before the injury. I'm going to give them a C+. I really want to know why Denzel Mims fell. Becton could turn out to be the best in the draft class. It's funny to look at it because Becton, Wills, they both battle Andrew Thomas. They all three battle for the top spot. It really just depends on preference and what you value in a tackle position. So yeah, the Jets probably not going to win a lot of games this year either, but they are building for the future, and getting a left tackle that has a chance to be your franchise left tackle for the next 8 to 10 years is always a good thing.
The year is 2056. The world has been annihilated in nuclear fallout, and Frank Gore has survived because he wants to play football. Yes, he goes to the New York Jets. Notoriously, I believe he's 3rd on the all-time rushing list. An illustrious career for Frank Gore, but this is probably going to be, at least, we say this every year, this is probably going to be his last season going to the Big Apple, but it remains to be seen if he'll even impact the Jets in any way. The Philadelphia Eagles are up next. They draft Jalen Reagor, a wide receiver out of TCU in the 1st round, a spectacular talent. I think he's a very underrated receiver. I mean, if we're being completely honest, I thought he was going to be, I think he rivals Justin Jefferson, maybe a little bit better than him. Your thoughts on their draft grade?
I mean, Jalen Hurts is a special talent at quarterback. When you think about it, he has a very tailored skill set. I really am not sure if he has the arm to play in the NFL. I know he has the speed, the athleticism, the brain to do it, but I don't know if he has the quarterback ability that Carson Wentz possesses to play in the NFL. I was reading on Twitter about a week ago that said that the Eagles were looking to add him into a lot of wildcat packages. That way, I'm picturing sort of like a Taysom Hill role that the Saints use him in. That way, he still has the ability to throw the football so the defense can't sell out on a run. It's hard to think that he would get any chance at playing if Carson Wentz is healthy. And I mean, that is the issue. It seems like he's hurt at least for a stretch of games every year. So maybe they do want a quarterback they can come in or bring in and succeed. But I asked this question. The Eagles are not a bad team when you think about it. Their defense is stacked, in my opinion, especially that defensive line. We all know that the story last year was that the wide receivers could not catch anything at all for the Eagles. And that was very true. They couldn't catch a cold per se. But bringing in Jalen Reagor to go along with Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, Marquise Goodwin, players like that, he has a niche on that roster. So, Jalen Reagor was a good pick, in my opinion. I think he fit a need. They needed a certain type of wide receiver to compete bring the best skill set that brings out the best in Carson Wentz. Jalen Hurts, a little bit of a head scratcher. They got a lot of depth. John Hightower, Jack Driscoll, who may get some chance to play if some injuries happen. You never know. I'm going to give him a B just because I like what they're doing with Jalen Reagor, and I'm intrigued on what they could do with Jalen Hurts to get him some playing time rather than to kind of limit him just in that backup quarterback role.
I'm going to say this as far as Jalen Hurts. This situation, I think, is the first domino to fall of what we are going to call the Lamar Jackson effect. And what I mean by that is, if you watched Baltimore in the first year that Lamar Jackson was a Raven, they took him with a flyer late first round. He fell. They pick him and they use him in the wild card primarily with Joe Flacco as their starting quarterback. But he comes in, plays the quarterback position to the point where it's most of the time going to be a running play, whether it's a read option or he hands it off. But every once in a while, he can still pull it out and throw a pass down the field. This is the same situation. Do I think Jalen Hurts is going to be Lamar Jackson? Probably not. Because Lamar Jackson, again, I don't think anybody saw the jump. I thought people thought he was going to be very, very good. No one expected the jump we saw in the second year from Lamar Jackson, winning the MVP and really contending for the best quarterback in football as far as a season goes. I still think it's Patrick Mahomes, obviously. But this is the first domino to fall. I think this is the first example we're going to see from Jalen Hurts going to Philadelphia, serving the same role. I like the pick for Jalen Reagor. I'm going to give them a B flat because – again, I think those are the two main positions that were improved. But the rest of the picks, I don't see a direct impact for that matter. And I think the Eagles could contend with the Cowboys for the NFC East title. For now, though, I'm going to give them a B flat in this draft class. Up next, my hometown team, not even hometown, my favorite team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. They did not have a first-round pick, so they waited till the second round and got Chase Claypool, a wide receiver who is most likely going to translate to tight end out of Notre Dame, along with Alex Highsmith, a linebacker out of Charlotte. Before I go into it at any point, I'm going to go ahead and get your insight. What do you think about the Steelers draft?
I think that the Steelers are in a good situation where they are right now. Big Ben coming back, hopefully healthy for them, is you can't really put into words what that means. Like you mentioned earlier, they had Mason Rudolph and Duck throwing passes last year, and that kind of limited them. Devlin Hodges did go on a little bit of a win streak. It kind of surprised some people. They bring in Chase Claypool, and ask you this for your opinion. Do you think that Chase Claypool is going to start over James Washington? Because you have to think maybe Deontay Johnson or Switzer possibly plays that slot wide receiver. In my opinion, Claypool seems like more of a bigger outside wide receiver threat. So my question to you is, do you foresee Claypool starting over Washington or splitting reps, or how would you think that would work?
What I expect, reading what the Steelers are expected to do and reading his measurables, it's no secret, at least in the minds of Steelers fans, that Vance McDonald doesn't have a ton of time left with the team. So what I almost expect them to do is, he's got the size. I almost expect them to try to translate him into the tight end role, trying to get him to the point where it'll be McDonald, at least for this year, McDonald, Ebron, or Claypool, or even trade McDonald to open up that second string tight end role. But as far as that goes, I think it'll be a split rep situation. I think James Washington brings the speed to be able to break open the top, to go over the top of the defense if you need it in some situations, put him in the slot. On other situations where you just need that 8-yard gain, Claypool is going to come in because he's going to have more sure hands. Washington's had some drop problems in the past. So I think it's going to be more, if he stays at receiver, it's going to be a split rep situation. If he goes to tight end, look out for him to try to replace Vance McDonald.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it as well. When you think about Claypool has that outstanding size, maybe lacks a little bit of speed, but if he's a big-bodied target, Big Ben's always preferred those outlets that he can go to. When you think of even Jesse James, just a safety outlet whenever the defense is focused on Juju or maybe Johnson, streaking down the field. So it's actually a good pick, in my opinion. It actually benefits the Steelers offense tremendously. And like you mentioned a little bit earlier, the Steelers defense really turned heads last year. They're always known as Blitzburg. They get to the quarterback. That's what they do. TJ Watt, outstanding pass rusher. Stephon Tuitt, Cameron Hayward. They have the defensive line to compete with anybody. The defense really just needed depth, and they got that with Highsmith. Antoine Brooks Jr. may see some time at safety, probably a special teams player for the most part. The Steelers are in a good situation. They have a good, well-rounded roster. Their window is still open for a Super Bowl. It's closing as Big Ben gets older. You have to think at some point they are going to have to take his replacement, and that might kind of close that window. But I'm going to go ahead and give the Steelers a B simply until we see what Chase Claypool can do, because right now, if he moves to tight end, I think that's perfect. Even if he stays outside as a wide receiver, giving Big Ben that outlet who can win contested catches, box out like he's a football player. I think that benefits their offense well and complements Juju and James Washington even more.
There are some people out there, obviously, that are big stat heads. Whether or not you feel that way, there are a ton of people who look at analytics and they look at numbers alone, and that's how they decide who is the best player. To me, obviously, I don't think that it's not possible to do that. You can't, there's different situations you have to take into effect. But statistically, this is just a fun fact about the team. The best cornerback in football last season statistically was Stephon Gilmore for the New England Patriots. The second best corner statistically was actually Steven Nelson, the second string cornerback from the Steelers. Again, I'm not saying he's the second best cornerback in the league, but by numbers, that just incredible. And the second string position did not give up a single touchdown. When you look at this roster, or Alex Highsmith, underrated linebacker out of Charlotte. And I think that's part of the reason why he was so underrated, because he comes out of the University of Charlotte, which, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the first players to ever come out of that program into the NFL. And Claypool, this team, from a general standpoint, I think obviously they see something in Big Ben, the fact that he's going to be able to come back and directly contribute. And again, anything's better than having Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges throwing the ball the way they did last year. But even if they get half of what Big Ben was, this team is going to be good, because in situations when you saw Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges, they looked genuinely scared to throw the football. And that prohibited the Steelers from winning a lot of games. The defense kept them in so many games. And that's the thing. This is another one of those situations where I think the Steelers are in a very underrated position, where there weren't a ton of positions they needed to address. They have Bud Dupree coming back on the outside along with TJ Watt. The defense is still going to be just as good as it was before. They do lose Mark Barron this offseason. And that may even be Alex Highsmith could step into that role for Mark Barron. So to me, I'm going to give a non-biased opinion. I'm also going to give them a B, because I think they did about as much as they could with the position they were in. This was the pick also I mentioned earlier, where I thought, what were they doing when they first got Claypool? Because I thought I really wanted J.K. Dobbins in that position. But the more I read about Claypool and the more he's going to fit into the mold of this offense, along with getting Eric Ebron from the Indianapolis Colts, I like this pick a lot. I'm going to give them a B, with the potential to be a higher draft class grade in the future. The next draft class, the San Francisco 49ers, the Super Bowl runner-ups last season, of course, coached by Kyle Shanahan. They drafted Javon Kinlaw with their first pick out of South Carolina, a freakish athlete at nose tackle, and Brandon Ayuk, a wide receiver out of Arizona State. They also draft two alma maters of ours, West Virginia, and Colton McKivitz and Jawan Jennings with their 7th round pick out of Tennessee. Jacob Underwood, the San Francisco 49ers, their draft class grade.
Colton McKivitz especially spent a lot of time watching him in West Virginia. Not sure he's going to get a whole lot of time, simply because of Trent Williams being where he is right now. In the future, he does have the ability to step into that left tackle role. I'm fully backing that statement that he could be a starting left tackle for a lot of teams across the league. He has a little bit of a need to improve in run blocking, but pass blocking, he's as good as they come. That's all was just that run blocking. For the 40, I'm going to give C+.
This team right here, I think the question marks for this team don't start with the draft class. We saw in the postseason last year, is Jimmy Garoppolo really the guy for the 49ers? Because when it came down to it, if you compare both sides of the ball and what really got them to the Super Bowl, even though Jimmy G was serviceable, he didn't lose them football games. It was the run game and the defense that really got them into the position that they were. It's going to be interesting to see if they continue to roll with Jimmy G going into the next season and beyond. Javon Kinlaw, spectacular pick, I think. Really, just like you said, a monster on the interior. I watched him play at South Carolina. Not quite reminiscent of Jadeveon Clowney, but very similar in the fact that he's just more athletic than pretty much everybody. And you can hear me go on record right now and say, I think, even though I am biased, I think Jawan Jennings is one of the most underrated receivers in this draft class. Most forced missed tackles in the NCAA last season, and it wasn't even particularly close with Jarrett Garantano, Brian Maurer, and JT Shrout throwing him the football. So I think Jennings was a solid 7th-round pick for them. I'm not saying he's going to come out and be the best receiver in their team. I'm not even saying he's going to have a long and illustrious NFL career, but he will be an interesting prospect for them. Put him in the slot on 3rd down, things like that when you need a few yards. Brandon Ayuk, don't quite understand that pick. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of that pick. I think there could have been other issues that needed to be resolved, but not terrible. To me, based on the Kinlaw pick alone, because I really like that to bolster their already impressive defense, I give them a B-. The next draft class, the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle in an interesting situation, of course, in the NFC West, playing against the San Francisco 49ers that we just mentioned. They're going to have their work cut out for them as pretty much every team aside from the Rams got better this offseason. Jacob Underwood, the Seahawks draft class.
With the Seahawks every year, Pete Carroll kind of mesmerizes me with his thought process. You know, Seahawks fans automatically expect a running back to be taken at some point, 1st or 2nd round will be a running back drafted. Jordan Brooks at Texas Tech, he's a good linebacker, and he'll be able to learn from Bobby Wagner. They brought back Bruce Irvin. He plays more of that pass rushing left end, stand up outside linebacker position. But Brooks is surrounded by a ton of talent. Jordan Brooks can be the replacement to Wagner in the future. Offense for Seattle, their problem has been offensive line for the last 7 years. Russell Wilson runs for his life back there. They give a little bit of help. They bring in Damian Lewis, who can compete for that right guard spot. They didn't really give a whole lot of help on offense. I'm going to give them a C just because Pete Carroll mesmerized me with his picks. And Blake, did you see the report that the Seattle Seahawks tried to trade Russell Wilson? It came out earlier this week.
I did see that, and it just confuses me to no belief, because I saw a stat also. I'm sure you probably saw this on Twitter and ESPN and anything like that. In his entire career, Russell Wilson has received 0 MVP votes. And that just blows my mind. The fact that I'm not saying should he have been the MVP every year or should he even have an MVP. I'm not saying that, but how has not one person ever voted for Russell Wilson to be MVP? Because the things he does behind that, frankly, bad offensive line is just incredible. He's constantly making escape acts, rolling out to this right, kind of rolling against his arm, spinning around. If you go back and look, the throw he had to Doug Baldwin against the Arizona Cardinals on a Thursday night. That sounds like an oddly specific example, but go back and watch that because it is just incredible. And he does it night in, night out. It's just incredible to me that they didn't upgrade the offensive line. And again, they brought in Damian Lewis, but no one in particular jumps out here. I think Russell Wilson's good enough to keep them in football games. And plus, their defense is still going to be very, very good. Jordan Brooks and Darrell Taylor, decent picks for them there. They get a C- from me because, again, as much as I love Darrell Taylor, again, Tennessee fan, love Darrell Taylor to death. I don't see the picks they made coming in and making an immediate impact. And the offensive line has been their most pressing need for so long, and they didn't really do anything about it. Only drafting one offensive line. C- for me for Pete Carroll and the Seahawks. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the players they've gotten already because you hear all the time about it. Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski comes in, and apparently, according to some officials, tons of players wanted to come to Tampa to play for Tom Brady. I think for what their position was, I give them a B+. I really, 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 really like the Tristan Wirfs pick at 13 because I think Wirfs has the tools to be one of the best offensive linemen in this class. And in that situation, the only question mark, aside from possibly running back on the offensive end for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, was the offensive line and specifically offensive tackle. Jameis had to run for his life last year. Instead, they know Tom Brady's not going to be doing that. He doesn't need to be doing that in this upseason. So they trade and get Tristan Wirfs in the first round. I really like that pick. They get Antoine Winfield in the second round out of Minnesota, safety. Go Golden Gophers. And Keyshawn Vaughn is the running back they get in the third round out of Illinois. Even though the rest of the picks don't really pan out to be a whole lot, I like this draft class for the Tristan Wirfs pick, and I also like the Keyshawn Vaughn pick in the third round. I give them a B+ for filling the needs that they needed. And this team, easily now a playoff contender considering they were not very good last season.
Yeah, I agree. Great pickup to get a tackle. It's not a secret that Brady does not like to be hit. That's been clearly noted. That's really the strategy to beat him. You have to get pressure on him. You got to get up in his face. He does not like to be hit. The whole tuck rule was invented because of Tom Brady. People forget. And like you mentioned, offensive line last year was not a strength. They were actually very bad. And when you think about how the offensive line played, I know just from watching the different games, especially when Carolina played, Carolina, I believe, finished the year second or third as a team in sacks, and they were on Jameis every single play. He really had no chance. So I can attribute a lot of those interceptions to pressure coming up front. So if they're able to grab a solid franchise left tackle to protect Brady's blind side, to go along with their already improving offensive line and their playmakers, that's a great pickup. We know Brady gets the ball out fast. It's snapped and then he gets it out. So now they have Chris Godwin. Gronk returns back to the NFL to play Mike Evans. They bring in Vaughn to play running back. So Brady has a load of weapons for his arsenal. Winfield's a good pickup. Secondary struggled. The run defense for the Buccaneers was amazing last year. That was the closest I've ever seen to Christian McCaffrey being shut down running the football. I believe he was stopped at like 85 yards or whatever it was. Bucks run defense is amazing. Where they struggle a little bit is in that secondary, stopping the pass. So hopefully Winfield can step in and play a big role, maybe get a few turnovers, interceptions, come into the box too to help with the run. Yeah, even more so. I'm going to give them a B minus. Great pickup to get that left tackle. He's a pure tackle as well, so they can move him around. Even if he doesn't pan out at left tackle, they can move him to right tackle and still get instant results. But yeah, B minus for me. Tampa Bay in a good position. In my opinion, it's going to come down to Tampa Bay and New Orleans battling for one spot in the NFC South.
We have the shocker of the postseason last year, the Tennessee Titans coming in as a 6th seed and got all the way to the AFC Championship before losing to the eventual champion Kansas City Chiefs. Derrick Henry is going to be back in Nashville this year, and they start off the first round with getting Isaiah Wilson, a tackle out of Georgia, along with Christian Fulton, a cornerback out of LSU, and Darrington Evans, a running back out of Appalachian State. The Titans don't really make any huge splashes to me in this draft class, but they may fill a need or two. Jacob Underwood, your thoughts?
Yeah, and the Titans, we have to think where they came from. Nobody really expected them to go as far as they did. And like you mentioned, no really big splashes. They are what they are. Derrick Henry's going to run the football. Tannehill's going to be a game manager. He's going to make throws when he needs to, hopefully, unless he has a step down. I'm going to give him a C right in the middle of the pack. No really super big names they brought in. They're just going to try to stick with that same philosophy they had last season. Pound the football, hope Derrick Henry can win you football games. And if not, put it on Tannehill and see what he can do for you.
I have to agree in that sense where I'm going to give them a C just because I think Isaiah Wilson's not a bad pick for them to be in that situation late in the first round. There wasn't a ton of talent they were going to get there. I think one of the biggest question marks that the Titans have is the receiving core. Corey Davis has shown at times to be an impressive receiver, but nothing that really jumps off the page by all means. However, we saw in the postseason last year, Tennessee is not afraid to just run the ball over and over and over and over and over again. Bolstering the offensive line isn't necessarily the worst decision to do with that, getting an Isaiah Wilson out of Georgia. The defensive side of the ball, I don't really think they got much better. Christian Fulton's not bad by all means, but he's not going to step in and start specifically for this team. Granted, they didn't have a ton of picks to work with. I'm giving them a C, for the fact is they could have been better than they did. Still, thank you, Tennessee, for knocking off Baltimore. Much appreciated in the playoffs last season. But really, I think they are content staying where they are, and that's not quite the philosophy I think they needed to have going into the offseason. However, I will say, we were talking halfway through the season last year if Mike Vrabel was going to be able to keep his job for the Titans. He kind of proved us wrong in this postseason run this year. We'll see if he can prove us wrong with this draft class as well. Last but not least, we've got the Washington Redskins. Brand new coach Ron Rivera, as Jacob Underwood is very, very familiar with. He goes over to Washington, brings Kyle Allen with him in the offseason. They had the second pick in the first round. They picked Chase Young. Everyone knew that pick was going to happen from the very, very beginning. Chase Young, a lot of people were saying, was one of the best players in total in the entire draft. That's why he was picked at number 2, a solid monster at the defensive end. However, when you're Washington, there are a ton of holes in that team, a lot of different situations. I think the offensive side of the ball, they're not that good, to be completely honest. And based on this, it's funny to me because they're not that great on the offensive side of the ball. But the one position I think they're pretty solid at is running back. I think that their running back room is pretty good. And I want to look this up just to make sure I have this 100% correct, because there's a lot of them, but they're all pretty solid. You've got Adrian Peterson, Darius Geis, and Bryce Love up in that running back room. That's a solid running back room. That's not that bad. But you draft a running back in the third round with your second pick? That doesn't make any sense to me. D- for the Washington Redskins.
Redskins fans, be scared of Kyle Allen. He's a career backup. He will come in and he will win you a game if the defense does not have time to scout for him. If the defense has any time to scout for him, he will throw 5 interceptions and you will lose 40-0. Ron Rivera he's a good coach. His time ran out in Carolina. They needed something new, both sides. Cam Newton was going to end up leaving, so it was the right decision to get rid of Ron Rivera. More so importantly than that, Ron Rivera is a very good defensive line building coach. People forget that Carolina's had one of the best defensive line groups his entire time there, especially in 2013 when Greg Hardy was still in the league, before he became a UFC fighter and had all those legal problems coming through. But Rivera is an okay coach. He'll build you a program. He took Carolina to 15-1, although I kind of attribute that more to Cam Newton's MVP season than Ron Rivera. But Chase Young, like we said, great pick. He's a very talented football player. The rest of their picks, not really any sense at all. If they're going to start Dwayne Haskins, I think that's probably what they need to do. They're going to need some playmakers, maybe offensive line help. They just got rid of Trent Williams. The worst thing you can do for a young quarterback is put him in a situation where he gets hurt. He's scrambling around all the time. I'm going to give him a D. The only reason it's not an F is because of Chase Young. Chase Young, like what you mentioned, may be the best football player overall in the entire draft. So he saves them from getting my second F of the draft grading process.
And you know what? Just because, and I like how you mentioned that. And plus, we live in an area where there's a lot of Washington fans, so they'll hurt me if I don't. I'll give them a D+ because of the Chase Young pick. And that's literally the only reason. Like I said, they get Antonio Gandy Golden out of Liberty. But with the stacked receiver class that was available, you waited until the 4th round and picked a guy at Liberty in this situation. I don't agree with that. And again, their second pick did not need to be a running back in any facet. You've got literally in that class that I read, that entire room that I read you've got one of the greatest running backs of all time, although past his prime, and Adrian Peterson. You've got an interesting guy, if he could stay healthy, in Darius Guice. You've got a guy who was right after Christian McCaffrey at Stanford and really did everything for the Stanford Cardinal in Bryce Love. It doesn't make any sense for me to go running back, but yet they did that with the 3rd round pick. Well, that's going to do it for this installment of Hot Takes with Holmes, the reboot. As I mentioned earlier, if you like what you heard today, then be sure to subscribe and be on the lookout for other videos in the future. My social media links can be found in the description along with my co-host. So be sure to give us a follow and let us know what you think. If you have anything that you want to say to us, if you disagree with us, let us know on Twitter. You can find us both. Like I said, those links will be in the description. But with that being said, like I said, just let us know what you think. Again, any and all support that you give is appreciated, whether it's what we're doing wrong, what we're doing right, just let us know. Also, if you have any questions you want us to answer, be sure to let us know in the comments down below or on our social media feeds. It can be about professional football, basketball, whatever. This is going to be a general talk show as far as sports goes. Today was just a emphasis on the NFL draft. I'm excited to continue this show going along the road. And again, sorry for a few road bumps here. I'm sure along the way, this is our first time recording it. So, Underwood, I'm excited to get going and continue this, and I appreciate you coming on as always. Looking forward to potentially arguing whether it's sports or whatever, or whether it's basketball, football, whatever, the next podcast with you.
Yeah, definitely agree. Love doing this, especially we're in this pandemic right now. Sports, not a lot of time on television, so I'm in a withdrawal. So getting on here talking about the draft was good. Remind everyone, follow the CDC guidelines, help us get through this pandemic, wash your hands, social distance, stay 6 feet away. The quicker we all adhere to these rules and guidelines, although they may not be ideal, everybody wants to stay at home, everybody wants to go out, summer's approaching. The quicker we all listen, the quicker we can all go out together and hopefully return to as close as normal as possible. But yeah, thank you for having me on. Hopefully we can do this again. Looking forward to basketball arguments, football arguments. If you have a knitting question, I know about some knitting. Ask me some knitting.
Very wise and very witty response there. And again, like we said, we want to take the opportunity. Please practice social distancing and stay safe through this pandemic. This is something that we've never seen before, even in situations back in the older days. As far as this generation, this is a very, very foreign, very strange to us. So be sure you're following the guidelines, be very safe out there, because the quicker that we all adhere to it and we get it all taken care of, the quicker we can all go out and watch a football game again in a stadium. We can't wait for that day. For my co-host, Jacob Underwood, signing off for now, I'm Blake Holmes, and we'll catch you next time here on Hot Takes with Holmes. Stay safe out there.